Could say that all thought is the attempt to solve a problem, or we could say that all thought is grasping, which is the same as saying that all of our thoughts are how we try to exploit our environment or the situation we find ourselves in. Putting it like this doesn't necessarily seem right to us. It doesn't seem right to us because it makes it all sound very crude. It makes thinking sound less than noble. And we are inclined to think that there is a noble aspect to thought. But nevertheless, when it comes right down to it, all thinking is the attempt to grasp. So we're trying to get something solid out of a situation. We're trying to milk our situation, get something out of it. And this isn't too hard to show. If there was a situation which was absolutely perfect, which isn't to say that all situations aren't perfect, but if there was a situation for me that I thought was absolutely great as it was, and I didn't want to do anything to change it or improve it, in that case, there would be no need for me to think about it. And thinking about it would get in the way. It would create a problem where before there wasn't one. So my problem-solving activity, my thinking, would be creating a problem simply by being there, because there wasn't a problem before. And they automatically is when thinking comes on the scene. Since thinking operates on the basis of problems, or problem-stroke solutions, since thinking works on the basis of trying to change things. And we'd never have a thought of how best not to change things. Well, we might do, but it would be a pretty stupid thought, to be a counterproductive thought. We could try and say that, well, sometimes we think in a way that is appreciative of the way things are. So we're appreciating things, or maybe celebrating things for being the way they are. So if I'm in a situation which is just great in the way that it is, I could celebrate that fact by thinking about it in that kind of a way, rather than a crudely exploitative way, which is a kind of it's an idea. It's not a very good idea, because since thought always tries to either add something or take something away or change things, the best way to appreciate, the only way to appreciate a situation is to give it assent to be the way that it actually is. So in that case, it could be said that we're assenting, whatever that means. It kind of means something, if only just to distinguish it from exploiting. So assenting on a very deep level, I'm delighted for things to be the way that they are. And so this is antithetical to trying to control it or exploit it. Now, assenting comes from a place in us. It doesn't come from our heads, though. It comes from a deeper place. Assenting is more like seeing that things are great on their own and taking the time to appreciate how they are great on their own, how a process is doing marvelously on its own. So maybe I can see the sunrise or the sunset, And I take a moment to appreciate that. Certainly, there's nothing I need to add or take away from a sunrise or a sunset. It's already it. It's already what it is. And that's the great thing, is that it is what it is. Certainly I don't need to modify it or bring my own particular slant to it. And that doesn't mean that we won't think about the sunrise or sunset. We might well. And that's reminiscent of Krishnamurti's story about two guys getting up very, very early and climbing up a mountain so they'd be on top of the mountain to see the sunrise. And he says, sure as anything, one guy's going to open his big mouth and say, wow, what a brilliant sunrise. And that might seem like we're adding something to it. We're adding the confirmation that, yeah, isn't that beautiful? Or isn't that magnificent? But it doesn't need our confirmation. And the confirmation gets in the way of the thing itself. It spoils it. It's like a little banal voiceover for something that doesn't need a voiceover because it speaks volumes for itself. Of course, the thinking mind isn't keen to let things speak for themselves because it wants to voice over everything. If there's something that's great, it wants to be there, partaking in that greatness and saying, yeah, this is really great. It doesn't really care about the thing. It just wants to subsume it, or it wants to take ownership of it in some kind of subtle way, or maybe not such a subtle way. So the point of what I'm saying here is just to say that if we are appreciating something, then thinking is the wrong man for the job. Thinking is the right man for some jobs, but the wrong man for this job. The wrong man for appreciating things being exactly as they are. And instead of thinking, we could also say controlling. Or instead of controlling, we could also say being aggressive. So at the end of all that, it comes down to this observation that thought is inherently aggressive. It's always trying to exploit. And that's not necessarily a bad thing, of course. If I'm saying that thought is always grasping, that sounds like I'm putting thought down, but it's just a technical description of what thought does. So if I'm trying to work out where I put my car keys, I'm grasping for that information. And that's fine. I need to grasp for it because I don't know, so I need to grasp for it. But when it comes to the totality of our existing, our being here, for that totality to be a grasping, one big grasping, is clearly not useful, because that means I'm never appreciating, and I'm always trying to get something, and I'm never appreciating anything. It's very clear that if my entire mode of being is one of grasping, that I'm in the grasping or aggression mode the whole time, that's not a particularly good situation. So we're not saying grasping is a dirty word and we must never grasp, but simply that when we are grasping, and that's the only modality of being we know, that creates suffering because it separates us from reality. Because reality as a whole isn't something that can be grasped, and the act of grasping occludes it or abstracts us from the reality, alienates us from reality. Certain aspects of reality, such as where my car keys are, can be grasped, but totality of reality cannot. So if I want to have any connection with reality, there has to be a break between when I'm grasping for something specific and when I'm actually just being in the world. So this explains why thinking all the time isn't a great thing. It's kind of like being hungry the whole time, going around permanently being hungry, and because we're hungry, we're fixated. We're not really getting an all-round view of things. We're chasing something. Or alternatively, we could be running from something. We could be, fear is the flip side of greed. So instead of being greedy, I could be afraid, in which case I'm thinking all the time because I'm thinking how to escape instead of thinking how to obtain the prize or how to exploit successfully the situation that I'm in. So that just kind of establishes maybe something that we know already, that too much thinking is not healthy for us. It doesn't make us happy. It doesn't give us any peace, and we all know that, so there's probably no need to keep on stating it and arguing the case. So then we come to the next point. What do we do about that? How can we tone down the grasping and the aggression and the exploitative behavior that degrades our existence and alienates us from the real world? So that's a good question. And the snag that appears when we try to do something about it, in inverted commas, talking about thinking, is that if I get a bit of awareness and I become aware that my thinking is all aggression and that I am wall-to-wall aggression, I wake up in the morning being aggressive, I'm aggressive all day, and I only stop when I fall asleep, and maybe not even then I might be having aggressive dreams. So I've got that in awareness now. Before I didn't see my thinking at all, took it for granted. It's like saying I just take it for granted that I am my thinking, or my thinking is a right and proper part of me, instead of seeing it as a tool which I can use when necessary. So then what I'm inclined to do is to try and change my aggression and tone it down so I'm not so aggressive the whole time. So what I'm doing there, of course, is that I'm being aggressive towards my aggression. So I'm creating a kind of a knot, a more complicated situation, a more complicated prison to be in. I'm doubly alienating myself. So I'm alienated from reality to start off with, and then I'm alienated from myself because I'm trying to control my controlling or aggress my aggression, and that's created another level of alienation. And that turns into a nasty kind of a situation. We can get caught up in that and think we're getting somewhere, but absolutely we're not. Heaping aggression upon aggression isn't a recipe for peace. So seeing that clearly steers us in the direction of saying what it is that is helpful. And what is helpful is just to be gently aware of my aggression when I'm being aggressive, when I can be aware, when I remember to be aware. So that's kind of self-observation. Self-observation is just noticing myself, but in a generous way, a kind of a kind-hearted or expansive way. It's not like I'm monitoring myself or checking up on myself to make sure I'm not doing bad things or behaving in the wrong way. So it's coming out of a more generous part of myself. I'm just noticing the way that I am. So in self-observation, there's no right and there's no wrong. So if I notice, as I undoubtedly will do, that I'm being aggressive, then that isn't wrong. Under certain circumstances, just to give the usual explanation, things can be right and wrong. So if I'm assembling some kind of flat pack piece of furniture and I'm looking for a bolt, it's no good me saying, well, there's no right and wrong. Any bolt will do, because it won't. So there is a right and a wrong when assembling flat pack furniture, and lots of other things as well, assembling loads of things, other stuff apart from assembling. But in self-observation there isn't, because if there is, that's not self-observation, it's just aggression, it's control. Right and wrong means control. Right and wrong means control, because the whole point of right and wrong is that we get things to be the right way and we stop them being the wrong way, and that's control. It's also aggression, because we're getting things to change and be more in accordance with the way that I think they ought to be. So it's kind of personalizing the world. Whatever my arbitrary ideas about how things should be, I don't focus on the fact that that is entirely arbitrary. And who gives a damn anyway? All my energy and attention goes on just trying to make it be so, the way that I want it to be. So self-observation and right and wrong really don't go together at all. So if I were to notice that I was evaluating myself in certain instances as being wrong, so if I notice that I am evaluating my aggression as being wrong, that isn't wrong. So I can just notice that as well without saying that it's wrong, because it isn't. I'm just noticing what's going on, and what's going on is that I am labeling what I'm doing as wrong and trying to change it, which is a very basic thing. That's our basic aggression. So I'm noticing our basic aggression, and when I'm being aggressive towards my aggression, I notice that as well. That's just as valid. It's just as good, and it's just as authentic a process of self-observation to observe my aggression as it is to observe my aggression towards my aggression. It doesn't make any difference at all. The key thing is whatever's happening. If it's happening, then I observe it. And if I'm thinking of everything in terms of right and wrong, I observe that too. So that really is self-observation in a nutshell. And it may not sound like much, but that is all we need in order to helpfully work with thinking or helpfully work with aggression. We don't need anything else. And the point is that when I observe my aggression, that observing in itself is not aggressive. It's not aggressive because, as I've just said, there's no right and there's no wrong to it. So, even though I'm being aggressive, as usual, as always, because that aggression isn't going to stop anytime soon, I'm practicing non-aggression at the same time. So here I'm aggressive, but I'm also non-aggressive at the same time. And even if I'm aggressive and being aggressive to my aggression, I can still be non-aggressive at the same time. No matter what is going on, I can always be non-aggressive. And the reason for that is that being non-aggressive isn't a contrived state. It's not something that I have to learn to do, like I might have to learn Tai Chi or learn calligraphy or something. Being non-aggressive is the intrinsic nature consciousness itself. So it's not that I'm learning to do things in a special way or doing something that is artificial or some kind of method, or because you could call it a method, which would be a stupid thing to do, but you could call this a method, and then you'd be completely missing the point, because being who we are in our essence is not a method, obviously. How the hell could that be a method or tool or strategy? Which kind of shows how ridiculous it is for us to be talking about mindfulness as a tool, a strategy, etc., etc. Because mindfulness means just being ourselves as we actually are. And being ourselves as we actually are, being ourselves is not a method. If it was a method, it would be trying to achieve something. So in that case, what in God's name am I trying to achieve by being who I already am? Is there anything further to achieve? What am I trying to get out of that? Is it a lever? I'm trying to use being in the world as I actually am as a lever to get something else, something better, something special. So really self-observation is remembering a way that we used to have of being in the world, and that we've forgotten about because we became sophisticated, exploitative adults who think being in the world really means exploiting the world. So it just means remembering to be in this way that we used to be, kind of like an innocent way, which isn't dominated by insecurity or greed or fear. And of course that isn't by any means an easy thing to do. We can move forward in life and become more sophisticated and more conditioned and more programmed and more socialized. And that happens all by itself, so that direction we can do. But to go back and become less tricky, less involved in games, more innocent, that there doesn't seem to be a way back to become like that. It's like wanting to be a child again. How do I become childlike again? All I'm going to do is do something rather grotesque, which is like being what an adult thinks a child should be or is be. So it's a kind of maybe a sentimentality or something like that. And it's not at all easy to remember this mode of being in the world where we're non-aggressive. But at the same time, that mode of being in the world is who we essentially are. Everything else is a corruption that we have learned or that we have had forced upon us. And there's no way to get rid of that or to cure that corrupted state. Because if we do, we're adding another level of corruption. We're getting aggressive towards the fact that we're corrupted by society, by modes of thinking. But we can't get aggressive because that's taking us in the wrong direction. That's alienating us further, as I said a while ago. So in that case, what we do is we practice non-aggression with being the way that we are. Which isn't easy because it means living life as the it means for me to live life in the screwed up way that I am, which is not by any means easy. But it's not a technical procedure, it's just me observing myself. Okay, thanks for watching.